Hi, I'm Jim Gillespie. I'm the director of this film, and I'm here with Steve Mirkovich, who is the editor. And we're going to be giving you some little bits and bobs of the making of this film, and probably some very boring other bits as well. But you can pick and choose. So this opening shot of the film that you're about to see, that fades out of black here, this was filmed in Northern California, just north of San Francisco, beyond Bodega Bay. It's a fairly long helicopter shot that we filmed. This is actually the first time I'd ever been in a helicopter, apart from the recce for this shot, which was the day before. And I went up with the cameraman Dennis Crossan the day before this and got the helicopter and just ran through this and worked out what the shot would actually be. It was fantastic on the actual recce, because even though it looks quite dramatic here and the waves are crashing against the rocks at this point, the day before it was really dramatic and the waves were smashing off the rocks. It just looked fantastic. On the way up on the helicopter to actually run off the shot, it suddenly became calm, and I thought it was going to be a waste of time actually doing it, and we were just going to have a kind of dead calm sea, but it worked out to the best. Plus, the difficulties of doing this really were time oriented. In order for us to get the shot at the end of it, we come up as the camera starts to pull up round about here. What actually happens is it comes up and then reveals a road, which is where one of the major incidents in the film takes place. And we couldn't have any traffic on the road, so we actually had to close the road probably for about 6 miles during a normal working day, which meant we only had 3 takes at the shot. The shot runs about 2.5 minutes long, I think. And we had 3 takes before we lost the sun, and also we lost the park ranger who was trying to hold traffic back with irate motorists trying to see the beauties of the Northern California coast. And it also proved a very difficult shot for Steve to cut, because as you can see, it uses all of his skills as an editor to make it
absolutely
cut into the movie.
Where was the camera mounted on the helicopter?
The camera's on a Westcam camera mount. And just at this point, what happens when you come down, this is actually very dangerous, because there's power cables cutting across the road here, and the helicopter comes in over the power cables and then gets to the point here in the one continuous shot, and then we had to cut off there at that point. I would have held the shot longer and gone as tight as I could into this sequence, but the wind buffets off the rock face, then hits the helicopter, and the helicopter just started to really move, and it got a little bit hairy actually, and so that that's the length of the shot ultimately was determined by the kind of demands of nature, really.
John Debney, the composer, did something pretty interesting with the music in here too. The way he took the typo negative song and blended it into a score. It was really quite good.
Yeah, no, it was brilliant. Also, one of the other things here with this sequence, this shot right there, is probably the kind of most difficult shot to colour time. That sequence was filmed over about three different nights, just catching little bits at the end of each day to try and be in twilight, and they were always very different in terms of the actual colour time of the scene, so it's kind of up and down and not perfect, but it still works.
Did you take over the whole town for this shoot?
Yeah, so this is Southport in North Carolina, and we actually it's called Southport, which is the town's been used I think 2 or 3 times before for movies. And we actually took over the whole town, renovated this theatre, which was just a desolate old cinema, and it still had the original projectors in it. And Gary Wisner, the production designer, did a fantastic job of dressing the place and keeping the whole nautical theme going through the exterior of the building, right through the interior here. The giant fish that you saw a minute ago proved to be a kind of very useful device, because we had a kind of key image that we wanted, which was to use fish and anything associated with fishing for the town in the movie, and those giant fish actually ended up dressing into several shots, as you see through the movie. Whenever we had a kind of hole that we didn't have enough people to fill, then there was a giant fish went sailing through the shot. Sarah Michelle Gellar. This scene she actually did on her audition for the film. She actually played this part with a swimsuit parade. And we actually cast Sarah. Probably she was the last of the four main key characters to be cast. All of the others I'd gotten before we went to North Carolina to film. And Sarah flew to North Carolina and auditioned for us there, and it was so obvious when you saw the screen test that she was right, and she walked away with the part. And that was prior to Buffy the Vampire Slayer actually opening. So we actually were very lucky in casting Sarah, because we got the benefit of her television stardom when the film was released. But at the time, she was a comparative unknown, really, although she had, I believe, had a fairly large role in a daytime soap that she won a Daytime Emmy for.
Were the people in the theater here extras from the town?
Yeah, most of the people here were just locals. Some we bussed in from kind of outlying districts. All the girls in the pageant parade there, that was difficult to get the girls. We ended up going to Hooters and hiring like 4 Hooters girls to come in, which of course made the crew completely happy, and I think made the editing staff quite pleased when they had to kind of cut all that stuff together.
It was a very long cut, the first cut.
Yeah, one of the comments I had heard about that scene was that she's awarded the prize even though she's wearing the bathing suit. Normally they award the prize with the evening gown.
Yeah, well, we couldn't get into that evening gown stuff. We just wanted to keep it simple.
I approve. I like that. Have you ever worked with any of the cast before?
No, the cast, I'm from Scotland, and so all of the cast were new to me. But we got a terrific strong Bridget Wilson here, who plays Helen's sister, Elsa. Initially, in the original script, she was the dowdy, spectacled kind of geek sister who was the ugly sister, and I just thought that was the wrong way to go. I thought if you had a beautiful pageant queen, the chances are that her sister would be beautiful as well. And so Bridget filled the gap. When she walked on the set, everybody thought I was crazy because she was so glamorous looking, and the script said that she should be this kind of dowdy, ugly sister. But Bridget's fantastic. She's really good.
Yeah, I've seen in other scenes you dress her down with the glasses when she's working.
Yeah, that was a huge dress down, a pair of glasses.
Yeah, well.
Pull her hair back.
Yeah, absolutely. This scene again, we had one night to shoot this scene. Most of the film was filmed at night. We had a 7-week night shooting schedule out of the 10-week shoots, which is a lot. Makes the crew gives them a really tough time, actually, just coping, particularly in a place like Southport, where everything is closed by, like 9 o'clock at night. There's nothing to do during the day. So when you work six nights and you want to have your day off to do something. So the crew got a bit stir crazy.
Can you tell us something about the script? How it came to be?
Well, the script's based on a novel by Lois Duncan, which I hadn't read the book, but during the casting process, it was interesting that probably 65 to 70% of all the girls who came into audition for any of the roles had all read this book, and I didn't realise it was a kind of a cult novel. And Eric Feig, one of the producers, he actually then took it to Kevin Williamson. This was prior to Scream being released, but the script at that point was called Scary Movie and had done the rounds in Hollywood. And Eric thought that Kevin would be the perfect person to adapt the book, and took it to him, and he liked it, and the whole thing just kind of snowballed from there. This scene's actually interesting. This boat that's behind the actors here, we put that into the sand. I just wanted this wreck to be on the beach, which kind of symbolises what's about to happen to their lives, and it was based on a painting that I saw in a reference book, and I showed it to Gary Wisner, the designer, and he bought this old boat in Bodega Bay and cut it in half, and then had a huge crane bury it in the sand. It took for ages to get it all set up, and then the cast turned up and said, "This is fantastic, you found this location and this boat is here." And they couldn't believe that we had actually gone to the trouble of putting a boat onto the beach. Also, this whole sort of sequence here on the beach became a kind of nightmare shoot for me. We only had one night to film everything that takes place on this beach and the next couple of scenes. from this point on. And it was June in Northern California, which means you probably only got about 6 hours of true night. So my point from filming this scene, which was one of the most important scenes for me, and the next two scenes, which in page count were quite a lot, I then had to do this scene and the next scene as one-shot scenes, basically because I had to complete that night. In fact, the producers, they drove away with their head in their hands probably about 3 a.m, bemoaning the fact that, we weren't going to complete and would be another day. And then the next morning they woke up and said, well, how did we do? And we said, well, we finished.
Got it done.
Yeah.
Were you competing with the sound of the waves here?
Very much so. I mean, Steve would have a better gist on the difficulties of that for him, actually.
Yeah, the production dialogue was actually very good. He did a very good job on that. But our sound effects crew, which was Michael Hilkeny, he did a great job augmenting these waves. We were able to clean up the original dialogue, and then through Michael's efforts, we really, what you see is what you get. We tried to, every time we saw a wave crash, he would come up with something that still had the same quality as what carried in the underlying dialogue tracks, but it really worked out great. I mean, it's a very dramatic scene sound-wise, besides being just a dramatic scene anyway. It's a great dialogue scene for these kids.
Yeah, and the look of the scene here, we would not have been able to have filmed this scene if we hadn't had a Musco light, which is a giant light that comes on the back of a huge truck. It's kind of like a stadium, like football lights in a football stadium, and it goes all the way up on a huge telescopic arm, and that one light effectively lit the entire scene, so you can actually see the sea beyond. That's one of the difficulties of filming at night, and particularly at sea. And later on, the climax of the movie takes place on a boat at sea at night, and it's very, very difficult to film because if you don't have anything that's lit, it's just black. So you can be out in the middle of the ocean, you can go to all that trouble, and if you can't light the background, then it just looks like you're on a soundstage.
Yeah, you can't tell the waves are there.
No, it's just total blackness. So that proved to be, that's why you see at the end of the film, most of the sea scenes take place with fog drifting in the background, which is basically there just to backlight the boat and the characters so that you can actually see that you are actually at sea.
Yeah, this makes it look like it's almost a full moon at night. Gives you that effect.
No, and the same light, again, all we did was spin it round from where we were further on the road for this scene. This scene, again, was one of the scenes that I had to do as a one-shot scene because the schedule was incredibly tight for this film. It's a very ambitious film for the budget. Some quite big sequences. The sequence coming up next, actually, when all of the main cast are in this car, took an incredible length of time to film because the road that we were on, although you don't see much of it through the background, the road that we were on is the Pacific Coast Highway. And to film this scene was probably over 5 or 6 nights, this scene and the scene that we're coming up to, which is a big dialogue scene on the road. But every time I had a car shot here, we were on this shot here, for example, we're actually on a camera truck towing the car, filming it from the camera truck, and that's on a kind of tow. The road there that you see the width of the road, and there when it's coming round here, every time we wanted to do this scene for any one of these car angles like this one, the scene lasts maybe a minute long. The time we filmed it, we had 7 miles to go before we could turn the truck round and then come back to do it, which meant I really only had 2 takes on any shot. And no matter what the actors did up to this point, I just had 2 takes and then move on and forget it. And they had to do what they had to do in that time because I just didn't have the time to come back. I mean, this was the biggest road closure on Pacific Coast Highway ever. We had like 6 nights of a 7 or 8 mile stretch of PCH that we closed down.
Did you rehearse the scene many times before shooting it?
No, we rehearsed it maybe 2 or 3 times. This is one of probably the most critical scene in the movie for me. If this scene hadn't been pulled off by the actors, then the rest of the movie wouldn't have worked. You wouldn't have believed what they did or cared about them as characters. So initially it started off as being maybe a 9 or 10 page dialogue scene, Steve.
Yeah. And
we cut it down and trimmed it down because it just played too long, and to keep the tension up, Steve and I had to go through it and just trim lines out here and there, methodically cut it down to the point where it just became very tight and honed.
Was that a stunt person that went over the car?
No, it's actually an old rag doll that we supported with just a piece of rope over the road.
Yeah.
And then we filmed it from 2 or 3 different angles. Each time when you saw it, I mean, Steve will probably tell you when the studio saw the dailies.
I got calls. What is he doing? Is this going to work? Is this going to work? You know, I mean, it had to happen so fast that, of course, I assured them, sure, it's going to work. Sure, it's going to work. And then I got in there and tried to cut it, and it worked fine. But, you know, it was pretty funny. If you've seen the dailies and you'd see, you know, rolling marker, and then you see the car come up to this. It was like a balloon with a cloak over it, hanging off a string in the middle of the road. You said, "There's no way."
And it just hit it and flew over?
It hit it and flew over, and we put some heavyweight sound effects on it. It became more of a blur, just an image, and it became very impressionistic as to what just happened, and that's why it works.
Yeah.
How many takes did you have to do on that one?
I did probably 3 takes on the actual hit, but again, the number of angles that we had of the car hit and the spin. I mean, the stuntmen did a fantastic job of spinning the car here. When the car is broadside on, there's maybe a foot either side of the road. You can see the road to the barrier here. There's no space there. And the stunt guy, every single time, was bang on and could spin the car and end up in virtually the identical place every single time.
Without having to wet the road, or?
Oh no, we didn't want any wet road. He just did it.
It would have really taken him out of control.
Yeah, which is actually was a problem for me and the first assistant on the night, because every time you spin a car, you leave tyre tracks. And so we had people out there after every track scrubbing the road and throwing dirt on the road and spraying the road black again to hide the tyre tracks.
Who got to make the dent in the car?
That was me, actually. I was given the hammer to do it. And
that sounds like the fun job.
It was great. It was really good. We put a huge bit of wood against it first and then hit the bit of wood, and that wouldn't work, so we just took the hammer to the car. And of course the transportation coordinator, he was freaking out because he wanted the car to be able to sell it and get some money back for his budget. And he was going, don't do too much, don't do too much. But we just gave it a good smashing, which was fantastic.
Have to make that indentation of the body.
Absolutely. This scene, I think the actors all pull off really, really well. It was a big scene. It was a difficult scene for them to do. And we split it over 2 nights filming. They ideally would have liked to have completed the scene in the one night, but there was just too many angles and it was just too much to do in the one night. So we split it over the 2. And in fact, we had an intervening night which threw it completely out of kilter. The scene that's just about to come up when a car comes round the corner.
Pickup truck?
Yeah, when the pickup truck comes round with Johnny Galecki driving. When we went to film that portion of the scene, the weather changed and it just rained for the one night, and it came down and we could film nothing. But,
fog.
Yeah, it was the same night. This fog came in, and in between takes, we just had to sit and wait. I got one shot in the entire night, which I ended up dumping, because when Steve and I cut the film in together, this one scene just had a fog bank in the middle of it. It was funny, when he was seeing dailies, he would see like a clear scene, and then within 25 seconds, you could see nothing behind the actors because of this fog bank just rolled in.
You know, in California, they call that June swoon.
June swoon.
June swoon, when you get the fog in on the coast.
Well, it comes in fast. Actually, this is incredibly like my home country. This part of Northern California is exactly like Scotland. The director of photography, who's a fellow Scot, and I stood in the road when it was raining that night and just commented on the fact that it was just like being home.
So even though it was raining, you had no cover shots to do if it rained?
No, there was nothing.
There was nothing else?
No, and we were stuck there on this road. Like I said, we closed the road down for 7-8 miles. And as you can see, there is no interior stuff that you can do there. You're stuck on the edge. And this was right at the end of the schedule. This was literally the last scene, I think, that we filmed. No, the last scene we filmed actually was the scene that cuts against this, which is them getting rid of the body. And again, that had its own problems. The location for that scene that we're just about to cut to We couldn't find a location for it, and I arrived on location, and the only place that they could find was a beach, which had nothing to commend it at all, but it was convenient for the production. So my girlfriend and I, who arrived the day before we filmed this, went for a drive down the coast, and we actually found this location with this pier and all the rest of it, and come back up and said, no, I think we should go down here and look at it. And we took everyone down on the recce, and Gary Wisner did a great job of turning what is a car park into a little industrial area with the pier, and dressed it to look as if it was actually a working area.
Where was the camera here? In the water in a boat?
No, the pier actually stops before this down section here, and we attached this onto, as the camera pans around, you'll see where the camera is. It's actually on the Steadicam just now, and as you come around here, we actually floated this little dock on the end of it and sunk it down. So all of this, that end section of the pier, we put there.
And this is just a little bay?
Yeah, it's just down on a kind of inlet, just on the coast. This was our final night's shooting, to shoot this entire sequence. Everything that happens here and everything that happens with the body being dumped over the edge, we had to film in one night. And at this point, I had 2 cameras shooting from this angle and from a wider front-on angle, with the sun coming up behind the actors' heads there, and no time, nothing else to do. And Dennis Cross and I were just sweating buckets here because I just had to complete it and grab shots. And I couldn't even get the actors changed as they go in the water here. So it's this angle and that angle are the 2 angles that film this stunt. As it goes over, I had one take on it really, because that's what happens. The actor jumps in the water and there's no time to change his costume. Well, I thought we could get away with it at that distance twice with him being dumped. So we got him to jump out of the water, go through it again, jump in again and leave. But it was very, very tough, and I think it proved one of the best cutting jobs that Steve did for me in the film, because he managed to pull what was insufficient material into a sequence that actually worked.
So this was right here on the water shot. That was not in a pool or a tank?
The underwater shot was actually that was in a pool, and we filmed that separately. That we had kind of half a night to film the whole underwater stuff.
Where was that at?
That was not far from here. Actually, that was in a college swimming pool.
And just dressed it up with the kelp?
Yeah, we just dropped in some kelp and filmed it as succinctly as we could.
But this actor actually had to jump in that cold water twice.
Yeah, he had to do it.
His performance is great in that scene.
Yeah.
And he grabs her.
Yeah, again, this scene was the actors here. Ryan is a very intense actor. He can be very intimidating and scary, and he did scare Jennifer Love Hewitt here, because they played the scene brilliantly. And again, when you have actors and they're trying to pull off big moments like this, key scenes, and you only have 1 or 2 takes to get it done because you're working under that kind of a schedule, you need them to be super professional, and they were in this film. All 4 of these actors, I think, are terrific. Very, very strong. And there you go with our blue drifting smoke, which became a kind of recurring motif that runs through the film that ties this scene to the end scene where there's water, and very strong blue colouring, which again became a kind of central colour scheme for the film. The designer and I worked out very, very tightly what the colour scheme for the film would be, and there would be no bright colours, no reds. Blue would be the predominant colour that worked through the film, and it was. And this is some of Steve's sterling work and his other capacity as second unit director.
Yes.
This was second unit?
Yes. And second unit, and I was also part of the cast of the second unit.
Yeah, if you look very closely, there's a man walking there who looks as if he's chasing after a woman. That's Steve.
More than likely. It was the oldest guy there.
Where was that shot at?
Oh, jeez. One of the universities.
Yeah, was it Duke?
It was at Duke, yes.
It was Duke.
Oh, yeah. North Carolina.
And the funny thing about Duke, they have a cathedral there that is absolutely beautiful, and it's the kind of thing that every filmmaker who goes there probably wants to pan off of that or use it somehow in a background. And it really is something that when you see it, evidently it's synonymous with Duke. And but you can't film it.
They want to allow you.
You cannot film the steeple, so you have to somehow get around it, and it's just sitting right there in the middle. So it's pretty interesting. You'd think they'd want to have it in there, but they didn't want to be identified. So.
Especially with a horror film, probably.
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah.
So this is the East Coast again, huh?
Yeah, we're back into Southport, North Carolina. And again, just at the beginning of that shot, you see another one of the kind of problems in the shot we're about to cut to. People don't really realise the amount of work that goes into the backgrounds in these films. You see there's boats sailing in the background here, just coming round. All of that is our crew working that, a marine coordinator, organising these boats just to tour in the background and fill up the space.
It's all staged.
It's all staged. The entire town is dressed, painted. Southport doesn't look like this. It's a lot of hard work from the art department to create the illusion of this quaint little worn fishing town.
How hard is it to get a town like this to cooperate?
It can be very, very difficult. We were lucky. Well, we were lucky in some parts because you always you jump through hoops and you try and please everybody, and then everything seems as if it's all done. The crew start painting signs that say Southport, and then somebody throws a span on the works and says, you know what, I think we might change our mind. We might not let you call it Southport. By that point, you spent so much time and money actually creating signs and loads of stuff for this. And that happened on this, and we eventually had to go back and kind of persuade the town council to let us use the town name, which they did. The town's actually been used 2 or 3 times before, although this is the first time that anyone's ever actually called it by its real name, which they were delighted for. They wanted people to know it was Southport, and I think given the success of the film, they'll actually have some tourist influx there.
Good publicity, sure.
Absolutely.
And here comes the name of the film in the part.
This is the first time. This is the title of the movie in key form, and it's interesting here because musically, what we didn't want to happen was that there'd be like a huge dramatic da 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 when the letter was open.
You didn't want to announce it?
No, you have to underline it. But what I think that John Debney did in the score was actually very subtly announce it. And then he actually builds underneath her reaction rather than hit the opening of the letter. And again, Steve and John and I would sit and go through the film several times and just say, we don't want to be cliched here. We want to be slightly different, slightly more interesting, more thematic. And we worked and worked and worked to make the score integrate with the film. In a kind of a very classic way, and I think John did a terrific score for the movie.
Great score.
Yeah.
Are you a musician?
No, not at all. But I kind of know what I like, and film music is I've heard a lot of it, and I have very strong ideas about how film music should work within it, and fortunately that coincided with the way John Debney thinks as well. When we met, the very initial meeting, we spent talking about favourite soundtracks, how soundtracks work, what makes a great soundtrack, where you use theme. And the great thing about John is he understands what a theme is and isn't afraid to actually use it. A lot of people shy away from it because they think it's old hat, and John actually hits that square in the face and creates something that you can then deviate from. And that's what gives the whole film a kind of cohesive sound. Because, films it's important that everybody works towards the same end in a film. Production designer, cameraman, editor, in every aspect.
Everybody has to have the same vision.
Well, totally. And, and my job as director is to kind of point the path that everybody should be going down and hope that they all go there, but allow them all to be creative. But if there is something that unifies the film, be it a theme for the composer, or specific colour scheme for the production designer or the cinematographer, then they follow that right through the whole movie, and so the movie looks real, it looks unified, it looks as if it's all coming from the same place, if everybody's following that same path. And I think in this film it very definitely does work. There's huge amount of care taken to the details in the film, most of which you wouldn't really see. Like I said earlier, there's a kind of fishing motif that runs through the film in the dressing. And even in this department store, you don't see it in this shot, but in a subsequent scene in the department store, in the upper half, there's a marlin that's on the wall, and that ties into so many other fish references that are throughout the whole film.
Was this a department store that exists, or did you?
Yeah, no, this department store is real and exists, and it's probably a perfect example of how the actual realities of a film location dictate action. The screenplay had a huge amount of work that takes place in this department store. One of the main scenes in the film that we come to later on, this big chase sequence, and Kevin had written it for a department store, but a department store in his mind's eye that of course doesn't exist anywhere. And when you get to location, what you then have to do is use the thing that you have. And in this instance, there's a terrific real old elevator, a hand-cranked elevator, that at the beginning of this sequence you see some workers loading boxes off. And when I walked into this place and saw the elevator, I knew we had to use that in the chase sequence somehow. And so basically what I did was then redo the entire chase to suit this location. And it's probably a good example of what a scriptwriter does in terms of he gives you maybe a sequence that he alludes to, but my job as a director to then say, okay, we make a completely new sequence that fulfills the dramatic purpose but is totally different from the one that was originally written.
Fitting in with the tools you have available.
Well, absolutely, and actually making a better sequence because you find things that you can use that, the writer would never have seen or knew about until you get there. And so that sequence became about that building. It goes up 3 different levels in the building and ultimately ends with the Helen character jumping from a window into an alleyway, all of which exists. And it was a case of finding out how to make a dramatic sequence happen within a space that's real.
So this is back out in
just along the bay. I mean, all of this stuff is Southport. And some of it actually is very difficult because you have to invent a kind of, because locations you shoot any location anywhere and then piece together an imaginary town. You still have to have some kind of a logic as to where everybody is, because the sea is to their left. So if they're driving somewhere that we've already seen where the sea is on their right, you have to physically find a way to get them from left to right. And I had to actually draw a little map for myself of this imaginary town so that when I shot a sequence, I wouldn't hand it back to Steve, who would then go, how the hell am I going to cut this in?
The sea's on the run then.
Yeah. And that happens. I'm sure Steve's been in circumstances where it has happened.
Oh, not on this picture. No, not on this picture. Very well planned.
This scene is actually the first day's filming that we had actually in the entire production. And so there's always a kind of nervous beginning for the film, and it was also one of the main dialogue scenes between the kind of 3 of the main characters, and it was just an interesting process watching how these actors who've never really met each other apart from a couple of times in a room then suddenly have to work, and they don't know the crew, and everything's just a bit strange, and we had a lot to do in the one day. The scene actually turned out really well, and I was pleased with the way everything went for a kind of first day's filming, because as a director, you're nervous too. But I was really pleased with the way things came together.
No rehearsal time on this film?
We had actually a week's rehearsal time, but I don't really like to rehearse in any great way. I think film tends to be better in the moment, and rather than kind of worked out to any great extent. It can help a lot, rehearsals and performance, but I think that in film, when you actually get to location, this location is a kind of prime example. The scene again was blocked and staged for something that we found in the location. The scene that plays here was originally written for a kind of a storeroom in the back of Ollie's bar, which you saw at the very beginning of the film, where they have the kind of party scene. And when we found this location, we kind of restaged the scene for here. But for the actors to work and rehearse, they need to move. The scene is about an action scene here. They need to move. They need to have a sense of what the space is. So if you do that in a room that's devoid of any reality, then they tend to lock into certain aspects of what they're going to do. And when you put them in the real environment, then it kind of throws them a little bit, because all of a sudden it's a different space. It feels different. It's not wet and cold the way the real space is. And the performance always is better when you actually get them in the real space. This was a nightmare day for us here, filming this sequence. We actually had one of the locals that we actually we took over the whole of this waterfront area and repainted it and hung all our props, built other structures so that it would look like a real working fishing town. It is, but it's kind of almost a tourist town now, Southport. But we had to buy up virtually the whole space for days on end. And on this one particular day, we thought we could get away with only shooting on half of it and using the back of the waterway as a kind of backdrop without actually buying it out. And one of the locals decided that he didn't really like that and started up his outboard motor, which he ran for about 25 minutes non-stop, and then started up a buzzsaw, which he then started cutting little bits of wood. Then he started up his car, turned on the car radio, and eventually someone had to go and say, okay, let's go back to our original deal and you can turn all that stuff off. But it cost me the whole morning. And actually there's one of the shots that's in the film that I would go back and do again had I had the time. But that's the reality of actually filming. Sometimes things don't go exactly the way you planned. Here, another good example of the kind of the work that goes into actually creating the environment within a film. The boats that are in the background there, we brought in and hired. All of that movement that you see behind Freddie Prince's head is all coordinated. A marine coordinator comes in and basically runs that the way you would with just cars as background traffic. Obviously, because it's at water, every time you come to do that, the boats take longer to turn around, and so you find that the day suddenly becomes really, really tight in order for you to achieve what you need to achieve in a day. The scene is about to come up. Actually, this is quite interesting. This scene is an added scene from the original cut of the movie. When we previewed the film the first time, the killer, the fisherman, the first few times you see him, he's threatening, but he doesn't really actually do anything to any of the characters. So when we previewed the film, we realised he had to be a more tangible threat. He had to be someone that you really were frightened and knew that he was capable of violence. So we shot this new scene and added it into the movie, and then we previewed it, and it had a huge effect on everything that comes after it. You now really believe that this killer potentially is going to harm the four leading characters. And when this moment actually happened in the theatre, the audience actually applauded, which is, I suppose, is a comment on society today, really. Whack, there you go.
Yeah, I would say after this, there's pretty much no question what the killer is capable of.
No, absolutely not. The rollover effect from that, though, is if you could imagine where the film had got to without that scene at this point, you then cut to Barry arriving to work out in the gymnasium here, and there are some spooky noises, and you see a shadow, and all of that is, mildly suspenseful. But when you put the scene that we just saw in, you suddenly realise that the same could happen to Barry. In fact, funnily enough, some people, when they watched the film and saw this sequence with Barry being, aggressive, kind of thought that possibly he was the guy who had actually killed the Johnny Galecki character, which is fine because it just works for that little brief moment. And then you get to this point in time and he hears the noise off, and all of a sudden, wait a minute, he's in danger.
Is this a stage or a location?
No, this is a location. I mean, everything that you see is a build in one respect, but the shell existed. Actually, again, this is a good example of the kind of the realities of making a film. We actually had designed an entirely different location. We found a fantastic old fishing processing plant that we were going to use for all of this sequence. And then within days of us actually getting to start work to dress the set, we lost the location. A deal couldn't be struck with the owner of the property, and we had to rethink the whole sequence. And we didn't have another location, and we couldn't really go anywhere else. The film was really based in 2 or 3 locations. So what we did was go over the waterfront area that we knew we had, and there was one building that was basically an empty shell. And Gary Wisner and I decided that we could turn it into a gymnasium. As you see, it's really basic. It is essentially just lockers, some lights. Everything else there is what the place looks like, other than the dressing, which is fine for us because the whole, old wood look is perfect for our film. But it was a quick, easy and cheap way of actually creating what turned out to be, I think, a really kind of suspenseful space. But that's again the realities of filming. You just have to get into doing this. Here, this is the beginning of this was one of this sequence actually was filmed over, I think, what ended up being 3 different nights. We started off hoping, we filmed everything you saw in the gymnasium, we filmed, and then we came outside to do this. And when we came out to do this, it involves a stunt at the end. The sequence itself is a lot of quick cuts. It involves car mounts on the car. It involves a Steadicam operator sitting in the back of a truck filming this. There's a crane shot there. There's, a stunt that has to be coordinated several times with the car mounts on this one to reach this point when a stunt happens. Now, all of that's a big night's work. But then we had to do this as well. You can see that's a lot of work. Well, we didn't do it in the one night. We only got to do the stunt one time on that night, and it didn't work. The breakaway wood on the big poster there on the sign didn't really work. It broke into a perfect square, and so we had one chance at it, and we only shot it from the front. So what we then had to do was think, okay, how do we do this? How do we go back and make it more dramatic than just him breaking through this wooden structure without the impact it now has? And so what we did was then realise that within the schedule we hadn't shot the scenes prior to this that you saw the kids when I talked about the fact that when they had the guy who started up the engine. All of that scene was shot with that bait shack which shatters into glass and explodes apart. That was built after we decided we were going to redo the stunt because we wanted the glass and everything to break away for this. And so we went back and realised we hadn't shot that sequence. And Gary Wisner again came up with that little shack that we established for the stunt.
Here's your country town hospital.
Again, location. This is actually a working hospital. But the hospital that exists in Southport is a modern hospital. This wing of the hospital is completely derelict, and we had to go in and basically redo everything. It's mostly a paint job. From a production design standpoint, most of the film is a painted film. Gary Wisner and I had a lot of examples of different colour schemes that we wanted to stick to have a kind of unified vision for the film. When I work in a film, I tend to create a kind of bank of images that are reference points for the designer, for the costume designer, for the cinematographer. And you build up boards, and it was fortunate for me because Gary works in the same way. He builds up image boards that for a character, for example, you would have all of Julie's colours and spaces and images that kind of reflect her environment. You stick key images together on a board and then stick them up on a wall. And if you do that for all the characters and all of the kind of spaces that you work within, when you put them on a wall, you can walk down the wall and see what jumps out, what doesn't actually work. And that's why the film, I think, really holds together visually, because we did a lot of work and everyone used the boards as a kind of template for colour schemes. So when they were putting 4 of these costumes together, then Kate Adair would actually refer to her colour schemes and say, well, all of that works, and I know that the hospital is going to be roughly in that same colour palette, and work within. There's very little red in the film. I didn't want to use red in the film at all, apart from when we see some blood aspects, and on the 4th of July sequence which we play later in the movie when it's red, white and blue. But the film's predominantly blue, and I used the paintings of Andrew Wyeth as a real kind of key element of the design of the film. In fact, there are some images in the film that, if I was to show you Wyeth paintings, even compositionally, they're very, very close to the actual paintings.
Now I have to ask about Helen's hair.
Helen's hair. Well, in the script, as you've probably seen this film once before you listen to this commentary, you realise her hair gets cut off, and it's a kind of major point in the movie. Actresses don't really want to have the hair cut off. It is, they are generally beautiful women, and they don't want their hair hacked to the scalp, which is the way the script is, and it would have been perfect if we could have done that. But the realities are that Sarah Michelle Gellar is a television actor. She's a lead on a very popular series, and we use her in her break. She was going to go back to start filming a new series of the film, so there was extreme limitations on what we could do with her hair. I personally don't like wigs, and I hate bald caps. Every time I see them on someone who has a full head of hair, they just look as if suddenly this egghead person has appeared on screen. So I didn't want to do that. So what we had to do was give her extensions and make her hair much fuller. She's wearing a wig in this entire scene, which becomes a real nightmare, because every time in certain sequences she has to put the pageant queen's crown on. Now, every time she did that, it would get caught up in the hairpiece and take the hairpiece off when she pulled the crown off. And then there was scenes where she had to run and jump, and that was another reason why I didn't want to go the whole wig route and have a short wig for her, because when she's being pursued by the killer, she has a lot of action to do. She has to run, she has to fall, and I needed her real hair to be there because I couldn't afford the time for the hair and makeup department to have to go in and dress her hair to camera so that you don't see the kind of wig points. This is a great location. I love this location. Again, we just passed one of my Wyeth shots. This house is kind of based on a series of paintings that Wyeth did. There's a very famous painting called Christina's World, and he painted them all in a New England farmhouse, and he really studied this building. So a lot of the look of this building in the interior and in the exterior comes from those paintings. There's a scare coming up here that I added as well. It's a kind of cheap scare, I suppose. But, you have to try and work out how long you can stretch a film like this to the point when you have a kind of pop-up scare. And this was one I added in here because I just felt we'd gone too long. So this was an unscripted one. And it kind of worked quite well right there. Anne Hesh, I think, gives a great performance here. She's really kind of creepy performance. And more understated than I think people thought it was going to be, because the role had the potential to be the wacky, crazy lone sister. And I think Anne gave it a kind of quirky kind of quality that no one else would have done. And it was really good, actually. This scene was filmed fairly early on in the production process. And the fact that she worked with Sarah and with Love Hewitt gave them, I think, a lot of confidence, because the quality of the performances in the film, I think, are very high. And that's partly due to Anne actually coming in, because they respected her as a performer. And I think the experience of working with her during these 2 or 3 days that Anne worked on the film actually helped the film right the way through the whole schedule. These photographs on the table here proved to be a nightmare. There's photographs of Anne Hesh and her brother, who is the guy you see at the beginning of the film. We couldn't get Anne together with the actor who plays David Egan. It was just proved impossible to have these photographs taken, so we actually had to have her just on her own and him on his own, and then one of the props guys actually then went into his computer and merged them together. And that all happened the morning of this shot, which drove me nuts. And so you can see, if you look really closely, you just see that these are not real pictures. Yeah, and again, there's a kind of odd thing here. She goes off to make a cup of tea, and I suppose that's a remnant of me being British. It was originally iced tea in the script, and I just liked the fact that she would go and put a kettle on for some bizarre reason. So it's supposed to be hot in summer and steamy, and she's off cooking hot tea there on the stove, which is what we mad Brits do. So.
How long was your shoot with Anne Heche?
I think Anne worked for, I think it was 3 days. I can't actually remember now. It was either 2 or 3 days. I think 2 actually. In total, we worked out on this location. It was very, very hot. Given that it was April, middle of April when we shot this, there was a sudden kind of heat wave that happened, and everyone working on the film started to get a tan, and we had to be really careful to keep the actors out of the sun, because at this point there's a kind of makeup design element that works through the film from this point. The 1 year later, Love Hewitt's makeup becomes much more pale when we first see her after that 1 year, and so we had to gradually take it into a more naturalistic look right through the end, because I didn't want them to look pale and drawn. They're movie stars, that's what they are, and they should be attractive to the audience. And so we had to kind of sell them as being pale and then gradually work them back so that you didn't notice the fact that they just come back to having a normal skin complexion. But as soon as you start working in the sun, and it's really intense, they started to get really red and tanned, and they were constantly having umbrellas thrust over their heads to keep them out of the sun. That scare there that happened, that is probably the biggest fright in the movie, and it's weird how that is so. I mean, I thought it would be a frightening moment, but the first time we saw it with an audience, they just came right out of their seats, and it surprised everybody just how much that had an effect. And it's impossible to gauge. As a director, you can kid yourself on that you know exactly how you're manipulating the audience, and you're going to bring them to a certain point and then shock them or scare them. And it's actually not true. The audience actually tells you so much stuff that you don't know. I thought that would be scary, but I had no idea that everything that goes before must lead up to a point in time when the audience needs that release. And it happens, and they just go through the roof in a huge way. It's a kind of weird experience actually watching an audience react to your film for the first time. It just tells you so much. I think this is this scene when we first screened this. I love this scene. I think both of the actors do a fantastic job here. It's really emotional. I think it's really heartfelt. And every time I watched this in the cutting room, I felt, no, this is a great moment. It works really well, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it works with an audience. They're going to get these two girls and the pain that they've gone through in the relationship. And we screened the movie, and the audience started going, ooh. And they thought there was this lesbian connotation going on in this scene. It was just bizarre. When she says, we used to be best friends. Well, we used to be a lot of things. People started laughing, and one of the preview cards, someone said, "My God, I thought they were going to die out right there in the car." And I had no idea that it would have that reaction. And everybody was completely stunned by it. And people were saying, "What, should we change the scene? Should we change the scene?" And I thought, no, it got a reaction, and if it was a good reaction, totally against what anybody expected. So we left the scene the way it is. And for some people, they'll just enjoy the playing of the scene, and the other people, if they get a kick out of it because it's some weird like sexual thing, then that's fine for them too. This whole sequence, and from a sound point of view, if you listen to this through on the other track, we really worked hard in the dubbing process here. It took a long time to actually put the sound together of the baseball game that's happening off camera. It was interesting because it taught me a lesson about sound as we did it, because I just suddenly had the idea when we were doing it that the sound of the ball game didn't sound real. There was something odd about it, and we didn't know what it was. So we decided to start to place it on the screen in the surround tracks where it would be in the house. So suddenly it goes from the left of the screen to the right of the screen to the back right of the screen to behind you. And it just gave a real sense of the place and where each person was in the house. So when you actually played the scene and the only real sound is that ball game shifting around, it suddenly became a kind of tension building thing. And I think it added maybe 30% to that section of the film, which was something that I didn't expect to happen, but it's something I'll definitely do again, is pay real attention to where the sound is in a space and try and position that. This is probably the one real cliche moment of the film, which I kind of hate, really, is the breathing. I think it needs to be there, but I kind of hated it. After the event, I thought it was a bit cheap, and I would probably not have done it now. This here, if you look closely, the hand that comes in and grabs Sarah's hand is a man's hand, and and it is actually, we wanted to try and do that so you would be completely sold that it was potentially the killer, and then you cut back and it's actually Bridget Wilson's real hand. And again, another little example of you'll probably have some film semiologist who'll tell you that the reflection in the mirror means something, and they'll find some way for that framing. It's actually using the mirror there just got round the whole problem for me of actually blocking a scene in a very, very tight space, and rather than have them just stand and face each other, I could actually play most of the scene in one shot by using the mirror and having Sarah walk. So it actually saved us time. We had to shoot something like 6 minutes this day to get back on schedule because we'd run over schedule on the boat sequence. So I had to find places. I think I said earlier on, there was a couple of times on the beach when we had to do scenes in one shot in order to keep up to schedule. And that's something that a lot of first-time filmmakers don't realise. This shot here, this shot actually proved to be problematic too. We originally shot it with a thing called an intervalometer, which is a kind of time-lapse camera, but it didn't really work out. There was some glitch in the camera and it ended up being just a complete mess. So we had to go back and shoot actually 3 different plates that were just normal solid plates, and then do a triple dissolve in post-production so that it looks as if it's a time-lapse shot, but it's actually not. It's actually 3 separate shots mixed together. And here we come to the famous cutting off of the hair sequence, which, as I described earlier, was really difficult to try and do anything that looked right. So from this point you can see where the wig is cut. Actually the length of where the cuts is roughly the length of Sarah's own hair, and we dress little pieces in, and as she goes to the mirror here you'll see at the back it's really well cut. She's got some long bits stuck in there, but she's got a really good haircut. She flew to New York to get that haircut. That was, and I could only do it 3 times actually as well, because we only had 3 wigs, and so each time we cut a wig, we had kind of used up our supply. Wigs are really expensive things, if they're good wigs, and they have to be kind of coloured to the exact same colour as the actress's hair. So that was a very, again, limiting thing that you have to work around. During the post-production end, this sequence, the sounds of the crabs that are in the trunk of the car became a real problem. This is Mike Hilkenny, the kind of sound designer's real problem. He kept coming up with sounds that I hated, and he had to keep going back and saying, what about this sound, what about this sound? And eventually we found that the sound of the scratching is actually crayfish, just tiny little crayfish recorded up close, just scuttling on the bottom of a metal pan. And the kind of more simple aspects of that sound worked the best for me. It became a very simple one-tone sound of the scratching. It's never really exactly what I wanted. It was a tough thing to do, and there's a kind of story about this body as well. This shot we had to redo a couple of times because crabs, like humans, don't always do what they're asked. And the first time we shot it, we had all these crabs in the trunk of the car, and they actually wouldn't respond. So every time that we opened the trunk, it looked like we had a whole trunk full of dead crabs just sitting there. And so we had to, Steve Mirkovich, when he was doing the second unit, had to go and take a crab wrangler and get these live crabs, dump them into the trunk just before the shot so that they were lively. And of course, as we all know, no crabs were harmed in the making of this film.
Not for the dinner afterwards.
Well, actually, the first assistant is a very good cook, and he did take some of them and make a rather magnificent steamed crab dish that he brought down onto the set. Not true, of course it's not. There was no crabs harmed in the making of this film. There's a shot here that I picked up when I filmed this scene. Again, we were under extreme time demands. You can see the sun is very low in the sky. We were losing it fast when we shot this scene. So I covered it in as few shots as I thought we could get away with. But when I saw the edit of the film, I actually thought I'd undersold Love Hewitt and her performance here. I thought she did a great job. And this shot here, we went back about 4 weeks later to pick that shot up. Which was just a close-up of her to camera. I'd stayed on the angle where she turned away from camera, and then I cut to this high shot. And when I saw the edit, I realised that she had done a better job, and I had to give her the benefit of that moment in close-up. Again, this sequence is all part of the same day that, as I said, we had 6 minutes to film in this day to get back on schedule. And so the coverage in this scene is basically 3 shots, apart from the punch, which is 2. The whole scene is covered in, I think, 3 shots. You've got this shot, a close-up of Freddie Prinze, and a close-up of Sarah Michelle Gellar. And it works. It looks as if it's covered. The playing is pretty good, but it's the base minimal coverage you could get away and play a scene of this length with 4 actors in the scene. And when I see it, I keep seeing the fact that it's 4-shot Freddie, 4-shot Freddie, 4-shot Freddie, Love, or Sarah, Freddie, and it just seems undercovered. But for anybody else, they don't notice it. They just go with the scene. The scene that this sequence leads into was probably twice the length in the original cut of the film. It was one of those cases when you actually got to preview the film and saw the film play with an audience that you realised that the pacing had to be kind of picked up. And so what we did was go through the film, Steve Mirkovich, the editor, and I, and kind of really pared down what was essential in the scene, because we wanted to get into the kind of the final push to the end of the film, which is a fairly long and involved action suspense sequence that runs from pretty much the end of the parade that we're about to see and the end of the movie. So we just wanted to get there quicker, and this scene became just a much tighter version of what was there originally. This again is all part of that same day, so all the scenes that we did in this bedroom and the sequence that we just left in the garden was a one-day sort of shoot, which was tough. And it turned out, I think we filmed something like 17 hours that day, because we then cheated some of this scene for day. It's actually nighttime outside the curtains, and Dennis Crossan, the DP, lit the room so that we actually could get away with some of these shots being filmed when actually darkness had fallen.
How far into the shoot is this scene?
Probably when we filmed this scene, we would be almost at the end of our time in Southport. So I'm probably 3/4 of the way into the film at this point. We had already filmed the end sequence on the boat, which is why we had to pick up time. The boat sequence ran over for lots of reasons, and when we get to that part of the film, I'll kind of describe that in more detail. The parade that we're watching now, we totally set up. This was filmed over 2 days. We had local bands come. We had local people that we bussed in, and they, stood and were terrific, given that it's supposed to be the 4th of July. It's supposed to be summer. It wasn't. It was actually pretty cold. Sarah there had to suffer quite a bit in her prom queen dress. But the rest of the crowds, every time we went for a take, they had to take their jackets off and pretend as if it was hot and steamy. I probably filmed this sequence with 3 cameras. We probably ran the whole parade route maybe 9-10 times each day, filming from 3 different angles. So we ended up with a lot of coverage of the sequence, and then we cut it right back. I think Steve's first cut of this would have been 7 or 8 minutes long, and the finished thing is maybe only 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes long, just to get the flavour of it. But you can't stage something like this and do it in shot for shot for shot. You almost have to cover it like a documentary. This obviously is a set piece sequence. This is all Steadicam work, chasing Ryan as he chases the killer here. So this is Steadicam, Steadicam, Steadicam. It's very difficult working with Steadicam. The operator has to know exactly where he's going to be. He's usually walking backwards for much of it, and so the marks on the ground become really critical for him. And so although sometimes you think that Steadicam is a way to get round some problems, it actually brings its own, which is to do with timing and framing. And if those things are important to you, and they are to me, then you have to allow the operator. We had a fantastic operator called Larry McConkey, who is the guy who did the famous Steadicam shot in Goodfellas that takes you right through into the basement of the room. He also worked in Basic Instinct and did shots in Basic Instinct that you would believe were tracking shots off a dolly. He's just the most solid guy I've ever known. He's fantastic at it. This sequence I really like, and I don't really know why. It's just the first edit of this put together because it's an expanded version of what was in the script. I wanted to build suspense at this point in the script. I really loved the location and wanted to use as much of it as I could. When Gary Wisner dressed this house, I arrived at the set and I just fell in love with all the detail that he had actually put into the set. So I shot as much of it as I possibly could, and I don't think there's anything that he did that isn't on camera. And again, the people you work with creatively give you so many options, and sometimes it's an embarrassment because you suddenly realise you've got something you want to see more of, and you try to stage the scene to include all of the work that people put into the film. Anne Hesh here giving her scary psycho performance with a knife. Yeah, and we're back at the parade. The parade stuff here, this actually throws up, the end of the sequence throws up a very kind of interesting dilemma for me during the film. We have a fisherman, we have him wearing a slicker and a big hood in the middle of a summer day. It's just a kind of ridiculous notion that anybody would be doing it. So we tried to thread as much of that into the film as we could for people in the crowd. But this shot here, which is Sarah's point of view of the fisherman, you can't see who this fisherman is at this point. It's really important. Now, when we film this, you can see clearly who the actor is, and we had to really darken the scene down in post-production to try and hide him. A lot of Kevin Williamson writes fantastic sequences that involve characters whose faces you can't see, which is great on the page, but when you actually come to broad daylight and trying to hide the presence of the fisherman, it becomes very, very problematic because you don't just want to shoot the back of somebody's head all the time. So we worked really hard, and that's part of the reason why there's lots of extreme angles in the film, lots of high shots looking down on things. I kind of based a lot of that on the photography of a Russian stills photographer called Rodchenko, who uses extreme low angles, extreme high angles, and lots of shadows and shafts of light. And also there's some Edward Hopper paintings and etchings that use really high extreme angles, and I kind of stole an angle from a Hopper etching, which is actually when Helen is killed, just further on in the film, and I'll point that out. The shot is a very high angle that you just see long shadows and the tops of people's heads, and you have no idea who the killer is. So that was the reason for the kind of choice of that. Again, this is an example of the location dictating where you set the scene. This scene was originally written to be in the kitchen of the house. When we found the location, I loved the setting. I loved the fact that the river at the back ran right up to the rear of the house. And so I had Gary construct a little area that would be, a kind of a shack, a little barbecue pit, all of that. I just loved the mood of it, and knew that the light at this time of day when we'd be filming would be low and interesting. So we completely reset the scene for the exterior, and I think it works beautifully. If you see this end shot of the sequence, the kind of crumbling old boathouse that disappears into the water was there when we arrived, and that's what I kind of tapped into when we got to the location. I thought, we have to use this, which is there on the left of the screen as you see it. That's all real. This shot's an interesting shot. One of the producers actually, when they saw this in dailies, thought that this was just some fortuitous bit of luck, that actually the scrim that all of this painting backdrop is on just did that by accident, and didn't realise that we'd actually designed that shot, and that was something that we'd spent a lot of time actually putting together and having painted on a theatrical scrim so that we could do that lighting shift. I've used this same sort of technique in a couple of pop promos that I did prior to that, but it was amusing to hear the comment. This sequence we're leading up to, this location is completely renovated from an old empty shack. Again, the film is actually very, very heavily art directed. There's a lot of work has been done in the town and in a lot of these locations. This is an old cinema that just had, I think I mentioned at the beginning of the film, just had its original projectors. And I toyed with the idea of actually using something to do with the projection booth, but it just proved to be too problematic. So we got down to, this is Barry's killing. I didn't want to have a lot of on-screen blood and gore in the film. I didn't think it was essential or necessary to the actual drama. So both of the killings of our kind of leads, the Barry character played by Ryan Phillippe here, and on Helen, Sarah Michelle Gellar, that this sequence leads to, I wanted to do in a kind of impressionistic way. And so we shot it just in little details, and we built the sequence through the editing process. But I was actually really pleased with the way this effect works with the lights into the lens, which I'd kind of designed, and Dennis Crossan pulled it off beautifully for me, so that you just see glimpses of things and shadows, and then it's gone. And so you kind of get the sense of what she sees. Then the killing, as I said, I liked the sound in this section. If you listen to the soundtrack, actually distorts all of these shots of Helen here are actually all shot at 30 frames a second. So there's a kind of subliminal slow motion that happens in here, and the sound doesn't match with her voice. The sound's real time, but everything that you see is actually just slowed that little bit. And we also put a lot of reverb into the sound and the screams, so there is a kind of surreal quality to the whole piece, which carries through into the upstairs section. I also like the score at this section. John Debney, I think, did a fantastic job in building kind of Helen's character through the score, right up to the point of Barry's death. So it becomes a kind of huge, lush, dramatic score. We had a 95-piece orchestra recorded that section, which was just a thrill. This from here on, actually, the character of the sheriff gets a huge response in the film, and I think everybody who actually saw the first cut of the film from the producers actually loved the performance of the sheriff here. He just plays it with the right amount of humour, and from here on, I just loved his character. I think Stuart did a great job. Again, this was you have to film this scene in one shot because we had to get out and get on with stuff on the road. So the reason it's just a very simple frame is partly dictated by the need to get on with the film. But actually, it's probably a good example of not overshooting stuff, because so often in modern movies, to my mind, there's too much coverage, there's too many camera angles in simple sequences. The need to cut just for the sake of cutting is apparent in so many movies, particularly action films, where you end up with what I call the cinema of confusion. You put 13 or 14 cameras up and you just shoot from every angle and then throw it all at the editor and expect him to cut it together. And there's no real geography. You've no sense of where you are. I like to build the sequence from the outside and then get into it so that no matter where they go, you know where they are. And that's why I kind of go for sort of wider shots to establish some geography of where they are. This alleyway that they're pulling into now, it kind of doubled as 3 different locations. Because when you're filming and you have a lot of work to do in one small town, some of the scenes in the script the town just wouldn't cater for, and rather than take the whole unit out of town and find the alleyways and sections that Sarah gets chased through from here right through the end of her life, in essence, you have to actually redress things and change it. The alleyway that you see in the distance now with the car parked with the killer is about to become an alleyway dressed with tyres and different wall hangings on the right-hand side. You'll see there's lights down the right-hand side of the wall there. They're about to go, tyres are about to be dressed in, and Helen is about to be killed in this same alleyway, although you never know. There's a whole maze of trucks that are dressed into this area just after this. The cut of the policeman with the blood coming out his mouth, I added in after the preview. The first time I cut it together, I had that missing. And we just found that you needed a kind of gory moment here for the audience to go, "Ugh!" And I put it back in and it worked brilliantly. For me, this is a kind of horrible memory of this night, because again, we were really stuck for time. When she kicks the glass out, there was a miscommunication about which window she was actually going to kick out. And so what actually happened was, on the day, I expected to have 4 or 5 windows that we could actually shatter and do. Unfortunately, the 4 or 5 windows were on the other side of the car. So I only had 2 takes on it. I had with 2 police cars that were identical that we could swap. And so basically we had one window and then we had the other window in the real car. And thankfully we got it in 1 take, actually. But if there had been a mistake, we'd have been in a bit of trouble there. This sequence proved problematic as well. There's a lot of Steadicam work across that town square, which the first time we did it didn't work out because we didn't have a kind of a special dolly and a gyroscope mounting that Larry McConkey has in his Steadicam. So the speed to keep up with someone running on Steadicam is impossible to do with the Steadicam operator running. They have to go on a dolly, and so we actually had to go back and reshoot most of the actual walk across up to this point on a separate night, which meant coming back to this location, which was difficult because we actually had to buy this whole kind of store out and film in the town square, and it's a real working town, obviously. This sequence that we're coming up to, again, from a lighting point of view, we wanted these shafts of light with the big dramatic fans just turning, just to give us a bit of tension in the room. And in a moment, you'll see how they work for us, because we turn out all the lights in the space, and all you're left with is this kind of strobing light, and then it cuts to just a dark blue light, which is kind of chilling. The murder of Elsa. This again gets a huge reaction with the audience. It's kind of brutal. A lot of people think that's an effects shot. It's not. It was shot live on stage. Actually, Steve shot that second unit because it took quite a big space, darkened space, to actually get the reflection in some focus in the eyeglass. And the space that we actually filmed in, it was far too tight to do in the real space. This was my idea, actually. This shot, it's pretty horrible. It's basically just a body harness that the actress wore, and we had a kind of half hook attached to the body harness, which was incredibly uncomfortable for her. But it gets one of the biggest groans in the film. Here, in an early version, actually, we had score right through this and music. I love the way the track that plays through here, Hooverphonic, leads us right through to that point, and it switches off, and then it cuts to complete silence. I had score at an earlier version of this, And when we did it with silence, I just felt it worked much better just to use the sound of the fans. And then at this point, we start to introduce the music again, just subtly as they push in, and also the sound of the fans increase, so they become what she hears in her head. The audience knows what's going to happen here, and it does. Bang. Huge scream, and off she goes. Sarah loses her shoes here, thank God for me. She had to run with high heel shoes right up to this point, which was incredibly difficult for her. Running across that town square with very high heels, she could have gone down at any point, and she was a real trooper actually to put up with that. At this point, it seems as if things are good for her. She climbs up onto the elevator, which I told you we found for real, so we incorporated this into the sequence. When we shot this again was a nightmare for the actor, because the rope, which should have been replaced with a new kind of soft fibre rope, hadn't been, and so Sarah had to pull this rope for all of these shots, different angles, all night long, and was complaining about her hands. And I thought, well, it's just an actor's complaint. And then I looked at her hands, and they were covered in fibres that had stuck right into her flesh, and her hands were bleeding. She did a great job of getting through the night, given the fact that she was actually in a lot of pain to do it. Again, this coming up to a stunt that took a fair bit of time to put together. Sarah gets to the window. When we cut to this shot coming up, it's Sarah. She looks back, in comes a fisherman, then we go stunt person. Boom. 3 shots that cut together, I think, really well, with 2 camera coverage for the actual fall, and then managed to cut in to Sarah just as she pops into frame there and bounces. I think Steve did a really good job of making that sequence go together. This sequence is actually my favourite sequence in the whole film, and I always had a really strong vision of what I wanted this part of the movie to be. The fireworks at the beginning of the film key into what happens now. This is the redressed alleyway that the policeman was killed in. We now have dressed it with loads of old trucks and petrol tankers, and we now light it with a kind of strobe effect light which plays as fireworks. The fireworks shot that we cut in there was from the original fireworks at the beginning of the film. In fact, it's the exact same shot reprinted. And then we used this sequence here with this strobing light, which I just loved the idea of not being sure, the sounds, the bangs, the hope of a crowd at the distance as she runs towards potential saviour. And then we cut to what will be the high shot that I mentioned I stole from an Edward Hopper etching, which is this shot here. If you look down, you just see on the edge of the left of the frame her salvation, and right in the middle, again, very impressionistic. There's no shot of any hook hitting flesh. The only flash of red you see is some blood that we dressed onto Sarah's hand. So I shot this, 5 or 6 times from different angles, and then did one tight pass with a lot of blood in her hands, just so that you would just get a flash, subliminal flash of red. And the funny thing of that night was, at one point, this is probably 3 o'clock in the morning, we decided to have the band actually strike up as they walked past. So all of a sudden, they started playing, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, a drum band is an incredibly loud thing, and the line producer went bananas. He was going, "What are they doing? What are they doing? Get them to stop! Get them to stop!" But the sound of the actual drums is the live sound, and I was really glad that we did it. This sequence, this was another kind of learning experience for me. All of the boat sequence that we're about to see was the most difficult stuff to film. You can plan for the things that are going to be at sea. We have an action sequence that takes place on a boat at sea, and everyone knew it would be difficult. However, this scene, no one had banked on the fact that, as you see, the boat is above the height of the dock, the Billy Blue here. And so you have that relationship between Freddie Prinze and Jennifer Love Hewitt, which is Freddie up, her down. We had to shoot this over 2 nights because during the course of shooting the scene, the tide changes. And so what started as the boat being 3 foot above the level of the dock became the boat 6 feet below the level of the dock. And it just became absurd. And no one had banked on that being the case. So we had to go off and shoot other parts of it and come back, so that the boat always had a kind of, you see it's down there, it's actually below the level in that shot. Again, stuntman for the fall here. We had a terrific stunt double for Freddie Prinze. Although Freddie did a lot of his own stunts actually, and some of the water work he did himself as well. We did have a great double, which means you can get away with so much. At this point in the film, every shot from this point on to the end of the boat sequence is handheld. Dennis Crossan did a fantastic job of operating the camera here as well as lighting it. But literally every single shot from now and probably the next 10 or 12 minutes of the movie is handheld. It's very tough to actually bring any kind of dollies or cranes onto filming a boat for obvious space reasons. Even this shot away up in the rigging is Dennis kind of strapped to the top of the mast with the camera handheld. As I said, this sequence for me was a nightmare to actually put together. We had a very involved plan of how to film on a boat, which involved mooring it to a huge dock that we had sunk with a 150-foot crane on it. However, when you actually come to really film on a river, we filmed on the Cape Fear River, and our marine coordinator was off-quoted as saying they don't call it the Cape Fear for nothing. And it proved to be true. It's a very fast-flowing river, and it's also where you meet a tidal basin. So you have cross-currents and eddies and whirlpools. And the first night that we went to film on the boat, we actually came very close to losing the boat, just trying to moor it to the side of our huge platform. And so the plan that we had, which was to moor the boat stern against the platform, allowing me 180 degrees of horizon and filming potential, actually ended up being every time we had a shot, we had to tie the boat to the dock that we were at. So each reverse meant also for Dennis, that his key light had to move. So we tried to film as much as we could in one direction and one angle, but given that it's a very fast cut action fight sequence, you actually couldn't get too far down the line into the scene shooting in one direction, because continuity for the fight would then be lost completely, and nobody knew what they had done and how to match it. So we actually went probably 4 or 5 days over the initial projected schedule in this sequence, simply because of weather and the difficulties of actually filming on a boat. For every single shot here, we probably had 30 people actually doing something. We had people actually rocking the boat by pulling on one of the outriggers with cable to make the boat rock. We had smoke machines drifting across in the background. We had outboard motors creating the wake. We had 2 other support boats actually driving past to create waves. So all of that you don't see, but you know, it just proved to be immensely difficult. And I totally understand why every movie that's ever been filmed at sea has gone over schedule and over budget. Jaws went 100 days over schedule, and I think I can understand why. If you look just there, you see the wake behind Ben Tilley just kind of throwing up. In the previous shot, and that one there is none. That's because the outboard motor kind of vanished at that point. And also you had slack tide, which meant that when you had raging water at one moment, the next time you had a shot, there was completely dead water. So we had to create our own waves with boats. All of the interior here is a set that we constructed. So everything below decks with Jennifer Love Hewitt is actually a big set that we built in an old gymnasium in Southport. And we had to sink huge concrete foundations for the gimbal, which is a huge kind of support platform that enables you to rock the interior of the boat as if it's at sea. So that's a 75-foot boat that we had inside an old basketball court that we had to sink founds into to put what was something that weighed something like 56 tons or something. It was a huge construction, but it worked beautifully. We didn't have a lot of time to actually film the below deck sequence of the boat. Here you cut to stuntman into the water. The boat in that shot looks as if it's moving really fast. Actually, it's just holding pace against the tide. The speed of the tide is what creates that wake. The boat is actually completely stationary, and it gives you an idea of how fast the kind of tidal water is at that point. There's also another interesting little thing that happened. We had filmed the end of this sequence before we come to this point in the filming process. And at some stage, we had agreed that Jennifer would actually lose her little top that she has, this kind of two-piece jumper suit there at the top. And she decided she wanted to lose the top part of it. So she did by the time we got to the end of the sequence. However, when we actually got inside the boat, I wanted her to lose it by snagging it on the ladder she just jumped down from. When we got to film it, we found it was impossible for her to get it snagged there. So we had to come up with some way for her to actually legitimately lose that little jumper and not be stupid. So we come up with this, what we thought was a creative suggestion, which would be heroic. She came here, she discovers that she actually can't get this hatch open. The killer's pursuing her, so she decides, using her brain, being a kind of a creative heroine, I'm going to use this as a rope. So she tied it round here, pulls up the hatch, and the only reason that she uses this is because we had to get rid of her top by the time she got to the other side of here. If you really look closely here, all of this ice is silicone rubber. You can see it bounce, particularly probably on this track because you don't hear the sound of the ice. So when she jumps up here, she's actually jumping onto a huge jelly mould, and you can see the ice sort of wobble underneath her. And now we have the reveal of the body. Down it comes. Big scream from Love. She can scream with the best. That body coming down, that again was a very difficult shot to pull off. It looks simple, but to actually get what is quite a delicate rubber or gelatin body, special effects body made by Matthew Mungle, who won the Academy Award for Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula. He made some great bodies for us, but they're actually quite delicate, and when you abuse them, they fall apart. So by the end of that reveal of the body, the Sarah model was beginning to get a little bit dodgy. Here again, I love this moment where this is what ends up being a rubber hook and hits into Ben Tilley's face. Muse Watson really did that fall and did a fantastic job. Freddie Prinze tore all the skin off his hand doing that. He jumped in the wide shot, he had to go for the rope, and we had a special effects guy belaying him off to one side and releasing the rope for the second of the two shots that cut together. When Freddie went for the wide shot, he thought that was still going to be the case and jumped for the rope, but it was tied static, so he slides down the rope and just burned all the skin off his hands, which is why when he actually, just prior to this moment, you see him pull down the hatch, and he does it very delicately because his hands are completely burnt with flesh. Again, difficult sequence, this special effects shot, which we weren't sure if it was going to work when we actually filmed it. But Steve cut it together really well, and I think it worked well. The end of Ben Tilley, off he goes into the water. We had a bit of a fright here. The stuntman, when he went off the boat, the water filled into the big Wellington boots that he's wearing, and we all get a panic because we thought that he'd actually been caught up in the prop of the boat with the rope that was still dangling off him. As it turned out, he was actually fine, and it was just the force of the water that caught in his boots that dragged him forward, and he thought he'd actually been caught by the rope and was being dragged into the prop. So there was a little scare moment there, which thankfully turned out for the best. All the stuntmen did a fantastic job on this film. I wouldn't have their job for $10 million, but they seem to love it and enjoy it. This sequence all of it is looped, and the voice is replaced because it was a very, very noisy set here, and this is probably a good example of additional dialogue replacement. I think it's actually really well matched, but both of the actors came in and redid all of this dialogue on a soundstage afterwards. Where we go now at the end of the movie is probably setting up a new ending to the one that was originally scripted. The ending as scripted still had a kind of 1 year later coda, which we cut to after we revealed the fact that the body has not been washed up, and all we're left with is a severed hand. And what actually happened in the original ending was that Love Hewitt is at college. 1 year later, she receives an email, and the email comes up and it says, "I still know." And prior to that, she gets a piece of mail, which you think might be a letter. It's not. It's an invitation to a frat party, which is still held through in the scene that we've replaced it with. But we actually previewed the film. The audience just didn't like it. It was undramatic. It didn't really help the movie. It just set up a sequel, and the audience didn't go it at all. So we all kind of thought about it and decided that we would change the ending completely. And I come up with this idea that's very similar to the short film that I made, actually, which has a kind of shock ending. So we put this scene together and filmed it in one day. Love came back. She was working on Party of Five at the time, which thankfully actually was filming on the same sound stage. She was actually literally the next stage, and so she could pop down quite easily. So we built this sequence, and I think once we previewed it, this became the best light sequence in the whole film, which is great for us because if you can leave the audience with probably the biggest scare of the film right at the last second of the film, then they come out with a real buzz. And films like this need the audience participation. It's pointless really just sitting and watching it on video or DVD as this is. You have to really get into the cinema and experience a film like this because you just kind of feed off everyone else's tension in the cinema. Everyone knew that something was going to happen here. When the letters are revealed and the steam on the door, they think that's all it's going to be. And in fact, we debated whether or not to end it on here and have Love scream, and I shot that. But I also knew that this is the ending I wanted, so we ran the sequence right through to the end. The audience now know something's going to happen, and the trick is to take them to the point of when is it going to happen. They know something big is going to happen. You hold the shot, cut, then it happens. Big scream, end of movie.